Okay, welcome to Creekside Book by Book for August 4th. It's crazy that it's already August, but here we are. And today we're going to go through numbers 11 through 14. And as we have been walking with the people of Israel from Genesis till now, they went, God called Abraham to the land, and they were in the land, and then they went to Egypt, and now they're on their way back from Egypt. And today is one of those passages where it's like, oh, they're going to get in the land. And if you're reading the Bible for the first time, you would be really optimistic at this point. Unfortunately, this selection of passages actually covers several different times where there are instances of rebellion or disagreement with the Lord, with God's provision, with leadership, all these different things. And so 11 through 14 has a lot of stuff going on, a lot of things that are important for the rest of the story with the people of Israel. And they're going to get to the land, and then they're not going to actually be able to take the land because they doubted the Lord. And so that's where we're going to end today. So in 11, starting in verse 1, it says, "Now the people complained about their hardships in the hearing of the Lord, and when he heard them, his anger was aroused. Then fire from the Lord burned among them and consumed some of the outskirts of the camp. When the people cried out to Moses, he prayed to the Lord, and the fire died down. So that place was called Taberah, because fire from the Lord had burned among them." And so here they're leaving Sinai, as we saw last week. And so the people on the way are complaining, murmuring. So much murmuring in the Old Testament, in the Exodus and the wanderings. They're complaining, and God hears it. And so what happens is fire starts burning around the edges of the camp. And it doesn't look like anybody is wounded or hurt in this, but there was fire that got their attention. And so they cried out to the Lord, and the fire burned down. And so this is probably about 3 days away from where they were as they're traveling. The whole journey to the border of the promised land that they're going to get to could have taken like 11 days. And so 3 days into this journey, they're complaining. It's too hot. It's too dusty. Why can't we stay where it's nice and fertile by Sinai? All these different things that they might have been complaining about. But the Lord is like, stop it, and a little bit of fire, and then calm down when they cried out. And throughout the Bible, we see fire is a sign of divine activity, even when the pillar of cloud and fire guides them. When the Lord shows up, when the tabernacle is dedicated, fire comes out from the tabernacle and consumes the altar. And so fire is something that they are taking, very seriously, that this is something God is up to. And so they recognize what it was and they stop. But that's just setting the tone for the rest of our passage today, because it picks up in verse 4. "The rabble with them began to crave other food. And again, the Israelites started wailing and said, 'If only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost, also the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic. But now we have lost our appetite. We never see anything but this manna.' The manna was like coriander seed and looked like resin. The people went around gathering it and then ground it in a hand mill or crushed it in mortar. They cooked it in a pot or made it into loaves, and it tasted like something made with olive oil. When the dew settled on the camp at night, the manna also came down. Moses heard the people of every family wailing at the entrance to their tents. Then the Lord became exceedingly angry, and Moses was troubled. He asked the Lord, 'Why have you brought this trouble on your servant? What have I done to displease you that you put the burden of all these people on me? Did I conceive all these people? Did I give them birth? Why do you tell me to carry them in my arms as a nurse carries an infant to the land you had promised on oath to their ancestors? Where can I get meat for all these people? They keep wailing to me. Give us meat to eat. I cannot carry all these people by myself. The burden is too heavy for me. If this is how you are going to treat me, please go ahead and kill me. If I have found favor in your eyes, and do not let me face my own ruin." So Moses is doing real good here. So the people are moving, and there's a note here: the rabble with them. Now, who are the rabble? When the people of Israel left Egypt, there were probably some Egyptians or other people who were also a part of slavery in Egypt that maybe took this opportunity to be liberated, and they left with the Hebrews, with the people of Israel. And so they are the ones who start this complaining, this murmuring, and remembering how much better life was back in Egypt. And even the Israelites are like, yeah, we had all the onions and fish and leeks and melons. We had all this stuff. We didn't have to pay for it. And they seem to be forgetting that this was because they were slaves. They didn't have to pay for it because they didn't have money. They were slaves. And so they are wailing to the Lord, wailing to Moses, and Moses is at the end of his rope, which, if you talk to a lot of pastors, this is how a lot of pastors feel on Monday morning. Why this is so hard? And so reading Moses, there are days where it's like, I get you, buddy. I get you, buddy. I get it. It's hard. And when people are tired and cranky and complaining, they're going to blame the people who are in charge. And so here they are blaming Moses, and he's saying, like, I can't do this. I cannot do this. And that's one of the reasons why, when we look at Moses, maybe one of the reasons why God was able to use Moses was because Moses understood that he couldn't do it. It wasn't up to him. It was God's strength and God's power. And so he's saying, like, if I can't do this on my own, Lord, it'd be easier if you just kill me and take me out of this whole misery. And so the Lord responds to Moses in verse 16, bring me 70 of Israel's elders who are known to you as leaders and officials among the people. Have them come to the tent of meeting, that they may stand there with you. I will come down and speak with you there, and I will take some of the power of the Spirit that is on you and put it on them. They will share the burden of the people with you, so that you will not have to carry it alone. Tell the people, consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow, when you will eat meat. The Lord heard you when you wailed, if only we had meat to eat. Were we not better off in Egypt? Now the Lord will give you meat, and you will eat it. You will not eat it for just 1 day or 2 days or 5, 10, or 20 days, but for a whole month, until it comes out of your nostrils and you loathe it, because you have rejected the Lord who is among you, and have wailed before him, saying, why did we ever leave Egypt? But Moses said, here I am among 600,000 men on foot, and you say, I will give them meat to eat for a whole month? Would they have enough if flocks and herds were slaughtered for them? Would they have enough if all the fish in the sea were caught for them? The Lord answered Moses, is the Lord's arm too short? Now you will see whether or not what I say will come true for you. And so the Lord responds in two ways to Moses. The first is, bring me 70 elders, and I will distribute the Spirit that is on you, Moses, with those 70 elders. And so we have seen Moses appoint elders to serve as judges with the people, and they met with the Lord on Sinai. They ate with the Lord. All of those things happen in Exodus. And now we see this could be those same elders, or it could be a different set of elders that are serving more of a spiritual role, a discipleship role, maybe, to go among all the tribes and to work in this power of the Spirit that Moses has on him. So he says, first, bring me these elders, and I will help it so you don't have to carry this burden alone. And then the second thing is, there's going to be enough meat for all the people of Israel for a whole month, and they're going to eat it so much they're going to be sick of it. And Moses is doubting this here. It's like, how are you going to do that? Because remember, they have flocks, they have herds with them, but those flocks and herds were part of their livelihood, so they would have been very hesitant to eat those animals. Also, they were part of the sacrificial system and all of the different ways that they worship the Lord with their different offerings. And made atonement for sin, all of these things. And so those were not just food supply. They were part of their livelihood. They were part of worship. So they would have been very hesitant to use those. But all the while, they've had this manna. The Lord has been providing for them, but they are focused on the goodness that was and not recognizing the Lord's provision for what it is at the moment. And so, so the Lord's like, I'm going to do what I say, and you will need to trust me in this. And so verse 24, so Moses went out and told the people what the Lord had said. He brought together 70 of their elders and had them stand around the tent. Then the Lord came down in the cloud and spoke with him, and he took some of the power of the Spirit that was on him and put it on the 70 elders. When the Spirit rested on them, they prophesied, but did not do so again. However, 2 men whose names were Eldad and Medad had remained in the camp. They were listed among the elders, but did not go out to the tent. Yet the Spirit also rested on them, and they prophesied in the camp. A young man ran and told Moses, Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. Joseph, son of Nun, who had been Moses' aide since youth, spoke up and said, Moses, my lord, stop them. But Moses replied, are you jealous for my sake? I wish that all the Lord's people were prophets, and that the Lord would put his Spirit on them. Then Moses and the elders of Israel returned to the camp. All right, so this is the first response to Moses' problem. It is a spiritual problem, and so the Lord gives a spiritual solution. And so these elders are brought to before the Lord, and they are filled with the Spirit, and they begin to prophesy. And the prophecy here is most likely not a declarative kind of prophecy where it's like, thus saith the Lord, or, it was more likely some kind of ecstatic utterance, not unlike speaking in tongues. And so when we think about the gifts of the Spirit today, speaking in tongues is something that, we see in the book of Acts, where they speak in unknown languages. And so this is one of those instances where this could have been an Old Testament event like Acts 2. And we see this again with King Saul, when he is among the prophets, that he may have also had some kind of ecstatic utterance, like speaking in tongues. We don't really know for sure, but that's what most of the commentaries I looked at lean toward, is that this is some kind of spiritual language. And so these prophets, the elders have this experience. And, in the Assemblies of God, one of our fundamental truths is about speaking in tongues is the initial physical evidence of the baptism of the Holy Spirit is evidenced by speaking in tongues. That's not the exact wording, but that's the gist of it. And so we look at passages like this and say, like, well, these leaders, they were filled with the Spirit and they had this experience where they spoke in a prophetic utterance. We see that with Saul, and then we also then look to Acts 2. And so that's how we, as a movement, have come to understand that gift of the Spirit. Now, these 2 guys, Eldad and Medad, they're out in the camp. Maybe they're sick. Maybe they're disabled in some way. They were not able to go out to meet with the Lord. But the Spirit, they were appointed as elders, but the Spirit still filled them where they were, which is also pretty cool. That God is not limited to our geography. These people were appointed to serve as elders. Maybe the committee of their clan was like, these are the guys we want, and the Lord honored that. And Joshua was like, we should stop this because they're not here. They didn't follow all the rules to have this experience as elders. And Moses' response is, again, demonstrates his humility. It's like, I wish everybody had this. I wish everybody was able to have the presence of the Spirit of God in their lives. And so Moses is not concerned that these 2 men were not able to come out to the camp, as much as he wants everybody to be led by the Spirit. Now, so that's the first response. The Lord says, I will do this. And so he does. And he sends the Spirit to do this work. But we do get this point here that they did not have this kind of experience again. Like this was a one-time experience for these elders. So that's an interesting little note. Verse 31 then says, now a wind went out from the Lord and drove quail in from the sea. It scattered them up 2 cubits deep all around the camp, as far as a day's walk in any direction. All that day and night and all the next day, the people went out and gathered quail. No one gathered less than 10 homers. Then they spread them out all around the camp. But while the meat was still between their teeth and before it could be consumed, the anger of the Lord burned against the people, and he struck them with a severe plague. Therefore, the place was named Kibroth Hattaavah, because there they buried the people who had craved other food. From Kibroth Hattaavah, the people traveled to Hatzerot and stayed there. So the Lord then sends quail. Now, one of the things that is interesting here in Greek, we see the Lord sending the Spirit, the Ruach. The same word for spirit is also translated as wind. Now, a Ruach went out from the Lord and drove quail from the sea. And so the Lord is using the supernatural Spirit of God, empowering people in one response, and then he's also using the wind, the natural elements of wind to feed the people, and so he's answering both of these requests, and the same word is being used in a way to make it as a Hebrew reader, you would come through and see like, oh, the wind of God is doing this, and the wind of God is also doing this. But the people, they were amazed. All this quail came in, and this is not unusual. There are migratory birds that come up into the Sinai Peninsula, and there are many, many, many of these birds. And sometimes they are so tired from their migration that they just sit on the ground and you can just pick them up. So it's not outside of the realm of possibility for these birds to be here. What is the miracle is how many of these birds are here, and that they would be able to supply 600,000 men, so probably about 2 million people with enough food to eat for day after day after day. The Lord said he would have that for a month. And they would have so much that they would get sick of it, that it would come out of their nostrils. And here, as they're talking about the experience that the people had, as they're eating the birds, they're struck with a severe plague. And the plague could have simply been food poisoning. Their desire for other food could have, like, the Lord could have given them some kind of food poisoning because of their desire for this food. And so he answered their request, but also there was a discipline behind this. Now, the reason I'm saying, like, there were commentaries who said it could be food poisoning, but I've also experienced food poisoning and you feel like you're going to die. And so, like, this is in line with the plague that happened. And then also there were people who did die as a result of their desiring other food, of not trusting the Lord. And so this is another example of rebellion, complaining against the Lord, leading to discipline. And so that goes out to the edges of the camp. All the quail are around the camp. People go out to the edge of the camp, and that's where we see some of their doubt and disbelief. And then it shifts back to the center of the camp in verse 12:1. Miriam and Aaron began to talk against Moses because of his Cushite wife, for he had married a Cushite. Has the Lord spoken only through Moses, they asked? Hasn't he also spoken through us? And the Lord heard this. And so Miriam and Aaron are Moses' older siblings. Miriam is a prophetess. And after they were walked through the Red Sea, Miriam led the women in a song declaring the goodness of God. Aaron is serving as the high priest. And so they are important people, and they start grumbling against Moses because of this Cushite wife. And the people of Cush could have been the people from like Ethiopia or south, like the Sudan area. So the Egyptians had a lot of bias against people from other nations, but the Hebrew people here also had some bias against other nations, and so they were using um, this wife. It could be Zipporah. It could be that Moses had a second wife. We don't know. We don't get the name here, but Zipporah we know as a Midianite um, in the book of Exodus, and so this could be it could be that they are looking at Zipporah as just a foreigner. Moses married a foreigner, and so that was upsetting to Miriam and Aaron. And so Miriam seems to be the leader in this rebellion against Moses, and so there's some kind of jealousy, some kind of um, anger that is boiling up, and so they let his wife be the thing that starts it. But then it gets to, doesn't the Lord talk to us too? Why should Moses be the one who is the only one that the Lord is talking to? Are we not also important? And so verse 3, no, so that's what, like, the middle of the camp. So the ridges of the camp are eating the food, they're getting sick, but then come back into the middle of the camp, the very center by the tabernacle. The people who are closest to Moses are complaining, and so we see a good amount of this like boomerang action happening. Now Moses was a very humble man, more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth. And that's one of those verses that's like, Moses, if you wrote this, that's not true. Like, to write down, I'm one of the most humble people ever. And so there's a way to be thinking about this word humble. Like in English, we have this idea of, I'm not, I think of myself less, not less of myself, but I think of others. I'm not trying to be the center of the attention. But another way to look at that is like, it's just like, he didn't want this kind of attention. And so if Moses did write this, saying like Moses was not seeking to be the most prominent person in Israel. Like that's another way to read this if Moses wrote these words. But there are some evidence. I mean, it would not be hard to have to go back through and like have Joshua, who followed Moses, write this down. Like Moses was humble. Like he didn't want to do this. Joshua could have totally editorialized here in the text. So Moses is very humble. At once, the Lord said to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, come out to the tent of meeting, all three of you. So the three of them went out. Then the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud. He stood at the entrance of the tent and summoned Aaron and Miriam. When the two of them stepped forward, he said to listen to my words. When there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, reveal myself to them in visions. I speak to them in dreams. But this is not true of my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. With him I speak face to face, clearly and not in riddles. He sees the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? The anger of the Lord burned against them, and he left them. When the cloud lifted from above the tent, Miriam's skin was leprous. It became as white as snow. Aaron turned toward her and saw that she had a defiling skin disease. And he said to Moses, please, my Lord, I ask you not to hold against us the sin we have foolishly committed. Do not let her be like a stillborn infant coming from its mother's womb with its flesh half eaten away. So Moses cried out to the Lord, please, God, heal her. The Lord replied to Moses, if her father had spit in her face, would she not have been a disgrace for 7 days? Confine her outside the camp for 7 days. After that, she can be brought back. So Miriam was confined outside the camp for 7 days, and the people did not move on till she was brought back. After that, the people left Hazeroth and encamped in the desert of Paran. So the Lord hears Miriam and Aaron's complaining and immediately was like, come to the principal's office, is kind of the tone. Like, come now to the tabernacle and we will get this straightened out. And he appears in the cloud and he says, he contrasts Moses to any other prophet that will ever be in the people experience in Egypt or in Israel. Like Moses saw the form of God, and that's a reference to that passage in Exodus where he saw the back of God as God was passing by, and that's the closest a human can be to experiencing the presence of God. And also, he speaks face to face. There's no riddles, there's no mystery. Moses gets directly the word from the Lord, and the prophets in the future will have visions and dreams, and there's metaphor, and there's all kinds of things that there are still a mystery even now as we read the prophets. We're like, what do they mean by this? But Moses doesn't have that kind of experience. It's a direct conversation with the Lord. And so the Lord is basically setting Moses apart from Aaron and Miriam, even though they're prominent and they're important. And he's like, who are you to tell me who I can call to be a prophet? Who are you to decide who I can have as my chief spokesperson for the people of Israel? And so the Lord leaves. But when the Lord leaves, Aaron or Miriam is covered in a white skin disease. And so when we look at leprosy, modern leprosy is it's called Hansen's disease, and it's not what the Bible's talking about here. There was no evidence of Hansen's disease in the ancient world at this time. And so it's a skin disease, but the skin disease could be defiling. It creates this ceremonial impurity. It could spread. And so the people, like we talked about in Leviticus, if you have a skin disease, you have to be removed from the camp. And so Aaron is like, what happened here? Don't let this happen to her. Like, why? Like, heal her. And so he calls out to the Lord, and Moses calls out to the Lord, and she is healed, but she still has to be outside the camp because there are ceremonial laws that we looked at in Leviticus about any kind of defiling skin disease. And so to bring her back into full fellowship in the community, she has to go through the whole process. Even though she was healed in an instant, she was still defiled or made impure. And so she had to go outside the camp and do the whole 7 days of purification before she could come back in. And during that 7 days, the people, they didn't keep going up to the land. They waited, but they were. This would have been a time for Miriam to reconsider the way she thinks about her brother Aaron or Moses, and how the Lord has called him, and how the Lord wants to use Miriam and Aaron as well. And so so that is the center of the camp. So the people closest to Moses are also rebelling. The people seem to be falling apart as they are making their way to the land that God had promised. And so they forget God's provision. They forget his power. They forget the miracles that he has done. And so these two chapters are kind of setting us up for what's about to happen. The power of God has been on display for a long time for the people of Israel. Like a year, they've been walking with God. And now they're about to get to the land. And so that's what chapter 13 gets to. So chapter 13, 1, they're trying to claim the inheritance that the Lord had set aside all the way back with Abraham. So verse 1 says, the Lord said to Moses, send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelites. From each ancestral tribe, send one of its leaders. So the Lord commanded Moses, sent them out of the desert of Paran. All of them were leaders of the Israelites. These are their names. Reuben sent Shammua. Simeon sent Shaphat. Judah sent Caleb. Issachar sent Igal. Ephraim, Hoshea. Benjamin, Palti. Zebulun, Gidiel. Manasseh sent Gadi. Dan sent Ammiel. Asher sent Setur. Naphtali, Nahabi, and Gad sent Geul. And these are the names of the men Moses sent to explore the land. Moses gave Hoshea the name, the son of Nun, the name Joshua. Then Moses sent them to explore Canaan. He said, go up through the Negev and on into the hill country. See what the land is like, and whether the people who live there are strong or weak, few or many. What kind of land do they live in? Is it good or bad? What kind of towns do they live in? Are they unwalled or fortified? How is the soil? Is it fertile or poor? Are there trees in it or not? Do your best to bring back some of the fruit of the land. It was the season for the first ripe grapes. So they went up and explored the land from the desert of Zin as far as Rehob. toward Lebo Hamat. They went up through the Negev and came to Hebron, where Ahaman, Sheshai, and Talmai, the descendants of Anak, lived. Hebron had been built 7 years before Zon in Egypt. When they reached the valley of Eshcol, they cut off a branch bearing a single cluster of grapes. 2 of them carried it on a pole between them, along with some pomegranates and figs. The place was called the Valley of Eshcol because of the cluster of grapes the Israelites cut off there. At the end of 40 days, they returned from exploring the land. So, what could have happened here is, these spies, like when they first left, like as they're getting closer to the land, they could have gone ahead, maybe even while they're waiting for Miriam's purification after the leprosy event, and they could have sent these men into the land to go and, as Moses says, see what the land is like and bring back a report. And so the goal here of this action is to give the people something to look forward to. It's to give the people, to help them see, like, we are going to go into this land that God has provided and is prepared for his people. And so go and see the land, and let's come back and let's let the people know like what we're going into. And it seems good. I mean, they see, there's cities, there's farms, there's fruit, there's all kinds of good things. There is a challenge, though, here. They see that there are some people who are the descendants of Anak. The Anakites is what we call them. And we will see that those are often considered to be the Nephilim, who are the giants, maybe. As we go back to Genesis 6, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were pleasing, and they took them. And so are there fallen? Are these fallen angels that were impregnating women and creating these supernatural types of beings? And that's what the people are concerned about. And so they go and they spy it out. They bring back the fruit, which like looked beautiful, but the Anakim are there. And so in verse 26, it says, they came back to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community at Kadesh in the desert of Paran. There they reported to them, and the whole community assembled and showed them the fruit of the land. They gave Moses this account: we went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites live in the Negev. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites live in the hill country, and the Canaanites live near the sea along the Jordan. So the first report is, yeah, it's really cool. It's great land, but the people are very strong and they're very intimidating. And there's all these different nations there. Then Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, we should go up and take the possession of the land, for we can certainly do it. But the men who had gone up with him said, we can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are. And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. Then they said, the land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are great size. We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak came from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. So Caleb is trusting that they can do this. They can take this land. There's 2 million Israelites, 600,000 fighting men, and that were a part of the census at the beginning of the book of Numbers. And so Caleb believes they can do it. He's remembering what God has done in the past, but the majority of the spies come back to, no, these are giants. These are giant men. They're Nephilim. And so we are not able to do this. And so this created more doubt throughout the whole camp that they could possibly take on these different people. And so chapter 14, That night, all the members of the community raised their voices and wept aloud. All the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole assembly said to them, "If only we had died in Egypt or in the wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt?" And they said to each other, "We should choose a leader and go back to Egypt." Then Moses and Aaron fell face down in front of the whole Israelite assembly gathered there. Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, I don't know, who were among those who had explored the land, tore their clothes and said to the entire Israelite assembly, "The land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into the land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid." And so this is this bad report is rocking the camp. It's going all throughout. People are afraid. Moses and Aaron are grieving. They're on their face. They're praying on interceding with the people. Joshua and son of Nun, they're ripping their clothes, which is a sign of mourning and great distress. But Joshua's distress is not in the possibility of going and fighting for the land. His distress is in the doubt of the people. And so he gets up and he reminds them again that the Lord is with us. The Lord is the one who fights for us. The people of the land do not have the protection of the Lord. And so Joshua is, this is really the moment where Joshua starts to take some prominence in the people's eyes. He's been assistant to Moses, but now he's stepping into a place of boldness, of courage, and knowing that God is on his side. And the people still doubt. And their doubts are essentially saying, like, they're either our children and wives are going to be taken plunder, or we should leave and go back to Egypt. And so the great turnabout here is that the people who want to go back to Egypt are worried about plunder. Those are the people that the Lord will now bring a discipline on. So they're responding to Joshua and Caleb crying out to say, "Let's do this." Verse 10, but the whole assembly talked about stoning them. Then the glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of meeting to all the Israelites. The Lord said to Moses, "How long will these people treat me with contempt? How long will they refuse to believe in me? In spite of all the signs I have performed among them, I will strike them down with a plague and destroy them, but I will make you into a nation greater and stronger than they." And so the Lord is essentially saying, let's start over, Moses, with you and your descendants. These people do not trust me. These people are doubting me. These people have no faith. But Moses, you have faith. We can start again. Moses said to the Lord, "The Egyptians will hear about it." The people that we just defeated, the people that you just rescued us from, they'll hear about this. By your power, you brought these people up from among them, and they will tell the inhabitants of this land about it. They have already heard that you, Lord, are with these people, and that you, Lord, have been seen face to face, that your cloud stays over them, and that you go before them in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. If you put all these people to the death, leaving none alive, the nations who have heard this report about you will say, the Lord was not able to bring these people into the land he promised them on oath, so he slaughtered them in the wilderness. Now may the Lord's strength be displayed just as you have declared. The Lord is slow to anger, abounding in love, and forgiving sin and rebellion. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation. In accordance with your great love, forgive the sin of these people, just as you have pardoned them from the time they left Egypt until now. So Moses' plea is, if you do this, you, Lord, will lose honor. The people will think that you are weak. The people of these nations will think that you have no power. And so instead, Lord, use these broken and inferior people to display your power, is essentially what Moses is praying here. And the Lord replied, I have forgiven them as you asked. Nevertheless, As surely as I live, and as surely as the glory of the Lord fills the whole earth, not one of those who saw my glory and the signs I performed in Egypt and in the wilderness, but who disobeyed me and tested me 10 times, not one of them will ever see the land I promised on oath to their ancestors. No one has treated me with contempt. No one who has treated me with contempt will ever see it. But because my servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly, I will bring him into the land he went to, and his descendants will inherit it. Since the Amalekites and the Canaanites are living in the valleys, turn back tomorrow and set out toward the desert among the route to the Red Sea. So the Lord relents, but the discipline is that an entire generation will be lost to the wilderness because they doubted the Lord. Everybody who saw the signs of God in Egypt, they doubted the Lord in the wilderness, and that is where they're going to stay. But Caleb and his faithfulness, Caleb will inherit the land, and he will lead them. And we'll see when we get to the book of Joshua that Caleb becomes a key leader in Joshua's leadership team. But verse 26, the Lord said to Moses, how long will this wicked community grumble against me? I've heard the complaints of these grumbling Israelites, so tell them, as surely as I live, declares the Lord, I will do to you the very thing I heard you say. In the wilderness your bodies will fall. Every one of you, 20 years old or more, who was counted in the census and who has grumbled against me, not one of you will enter the land I swore with uplifted hand to make your home, except Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, son of Nun. As for your children that you said would be taken plunder, I will bring them in to enjoy the land you have rejected. But as for you, your bodies will fall in the wilderness. Your children will be shepherds here for 40 years, suffering for your unfaithfulness until the last of your bodies lies in the wilderness. For 40 years, 1 year for each of the 40 days you explored the land. You will suffer for your sins and know what it is like to have me against you. I, the Lord, have spoken, and I will surely do these things to this whole wicked community, which has banded together against me. They will meet their end in the wilderness, and they will all die. So the men Moses had sent to explore the land, who returned and made the whole community grumble against him by spreading a bad report about it. These men, who were responsible for spreading the bad report about the land, were struck down and died of a plague before the Lord. Of the men who went to explore their land, only Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, survived. When Moses reported this to all the Israelites, they mourned bitterly. Early the next morning, they set out for the highest point in the hill country, saying, now we are ready to go up to the land the Lord promised. Surely we have sinned. But Moses said, why are you disobeying the Lord's command? This will not succeed. Do not go up, because the Lord is not with you. You will be defeated by your enemies, for the Amalekites and the Canaanites will face you there. Because you have turned away from the Lord, he will not be with you and you will fall by the sword. Nevertheless, in their presumption, they went up toward the highest point in the hill country, though neither Moses nor the ark of the Lord's covenant moved from the camp. Then the Amalekites and the Canaanites who lived in the hill country came down and attacked them and beat them down all the way to Hormah. So the Lord's essentially his curse is shared. You, this whole generation, you will die in the wilderness. Your children will inherit it, but you will not. And then also only the spies who were casting doubt. There was not a plague through the whole land, through the whole camp. It was only the 10 spies who were doubting the Lord. They experienced the plague and died. And I just find it so amazing that the people the next day, they're like, okay, well, let's try now. We just doubted God, and he said he's not with us, but let's try. Let's see. And Moses warned them, no, don't. You will die. You will lose. And that is exactly what happens. And so for 40 years, from this point all the way to Joshua, the people wander in the wilderness. And this doubt, this rebellion, this murmuring and complaining against the Lord keeps the people of Israel outside of inheriting the land. And so these verses really do give us a picture for the people of Israel. And it's not just the rabble, it's every person in Israel complains, all the way up to Moses' own siblings. But then even as we continue through the story, we're going to see that Moses is not going to be able to enter the land either because of his disobedience to the Lord. And so this is really kind of the key part for the book of Numbers. Like, what is keeping the people from the land? Doubting that his arm is strong enough, that his arm is long enough to help the people. So next week we will get back to, there's going to be some more laws that we'll look at, and we'll see that the Lord is with the people and he will provide for them while they're in the wilderness, but a whole generation is going to be lost to the wilderness and buried in the wilderness. So any questions or thoughts on Numbers 11 through 14?
Well, I always have questions.
Yeah, that's great.
Well, I'm astounded. We go back to the beginning portion. When he was given him meat, no kidding, he gives him a lot. If you look at the caption down below, whatever thing it was, the measurement, it's like a ton. He gives them 10 tons of meat per grouping. That's amazing.
Yeah, a homer of meat is like a wheelbarrow full, like that much meat, and so they all get 10 of those to eat.
Is that per person?
I guess, yeah. I mean, it's a lot. So
You wasn't kidding.
yeah, and like the way he talks about it is like, you're gonna be so sick of it, it's gonna be coming out of your nose. Like, that's gross. Like, and if you're thinking about food poisoning, and maybe vomiting up the food, like that's the plague that they're experiencing. Like, sometimes it comes out with great force. Sometimes it comes out your nose. So, speaking from experience. Anyway, so yeah, it's a pretty intense discipline for the people. So
yeah, it reminds me of those. My dad always told us the story that when his mother first caught him smoking cigarettes, she sat him down and made him smoke the entire pack in one sitting, and he never smoked again. So that's kind of what brought to mind with, you're going to be eating so much meat that it's going to be like coming out your nose. Like, it's like, oh, you want meat? I'll give you meat.
Kind of like how I feel about leftovers.
Is this ever going to go away?
Leftovers. I'm like, I'm making so much because I'm eating it for another week. All right.
Yeah.
It's the day after Thanksgiving when you're like, how many more days am I going to be eating turkey?
Yeah, that was my Thanksgiving.
More days. So yeah. Any other thoughts or notes from these passages?
I had a question. I was really curious why Miriam was punished in the way that she was punished and Aaron was not. My translation was saying that they were complaining, so it didn't necessarily say that it was Miriam who started the complaining, but that it was a joint effort. And so I was just curious as to why, if you read anything about like why she was punished in the way she was. And Aaron.
Well, there's a subtle indicator here that Miriam may have been the leader in this effort because she was listed first. And so that's one of the reasons that people say, well, she may have received this punishment because she may be leading, because the text says Miriam is the one who's bringing this up. So that's one reason. The other reason is because Aaron is the high priest, and for him to be leprous, to be ceremonially impure, could have been catastrophic to the tabernacle system. And so even her being close to him, close enough to touch, like that could have been enough to get Aaron's attention. Like, we're serious about this. So don't mess with this. But we see earlier in Exodus Aaron is kind of a pushover when the people are like, we need gods to worship. And he's like, okay, I'll help you with that. Like he knows not to make an idol, but he does it anyway. So Aaron is not the most strong-willed person in the text so far. And so that may be part of, why Miriam was a little bit more strong-willed, a little bit more of the leader, and Aaron was more of a follower. It's kind of what some of the commentaries were saying. So,
Well, isn't he the one that he says that he put the gold in the fire and it just came out like a serpent?
it came out like a calf, yeah.
Oh, a calf. Yeah, not a serpent, a calf.
Yeah. Things happen to Aaron. Aaron doesn't seem to take any ownership of things happening. So, yeah. So it's not fair. It doesn't seem fair, right, Sydney? Like that Aaron didn't get leprosy and Miriam did. That doesn't seem fair. But yeah, that's what I found. Because I've wondered that too. Like they're both doing this. Why? So what I found in the research was it seems like Miriam is the leader and Aaron is a high priest. Like that would not go great. So
Yeah, makes sense.
My other thing, I have to kind of laugh when they're expected meat. I'm sure in their minds they're probably thinking, steak or lamb, and they're like, "Oh, you sent me quail." Like, here's the thing: you get steak or you get chicken. Wow, chicken again.
yeah, more chicken. Yeah. So and they probably weren't eating a lot of the cows and the sheep anyway, because that was their livelihood. And so yeah, so really like their diet would have consisted of a lot of fish, a lot of poultry, a lot of vegetables, because those are things that in Egypt would have been more readily available. And so it's yeah, so the cows, like to say like let's just eat these cows or these sheep, that would have been a pretty desperate move for the people. So
Did they just sell their cattle and all that to outsiders? I mean, if they didn't eat it, what was the use of continually eating?
well, they would eat the milk and they would eat it, but it would have been part of the sacrifice and like feasts and those kinds of things. So it's like it's not something that you don't have steak on Thursday.
Yeah.
Right. It's like this is very special, but they still need to eat on Thursday. And so it's one of those things that's like we need to make sure that we are able to hold on to the things we need for worshiping the Lord and making those sacrifices, making wool from the sheep, making milk, all of those different kinds of things they would have used the cattle and the sheep for, and the goats. But they would have been very hesitant just to say like, let's eat this cow, because the cow's huge and they're in the wilderness too. Like we got to eat all of it. There's no way to really preserve it. So
No refrigeration.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of work that went into that kind of food. So whereas fish is like, here's a fish, your family eats this fish. So
This just seems like they're the crossroads for them. They could have either been there in a few days, weeks, whatever, but because of this, they just here you go around the circle around the mountain again for 40 years.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of the most tragic passages in all the Old Testament. Like you were right there. You were right on the cusp, and you didn't trust the Lord, and so now you are banished. So they spent 400 years in slavery, and then another 40 years in the wilderness, waiting to get back to the land that God had promised their ancestors. So, yeah.
When in reality, how long of a journey do you think it would have taken them if they had just plowed on through, focused, did what they were supposed to do?
Like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
To get to the land. And then when we read Joshua, they do have a season of conquest that I think is like a few years of actually defeating and war and driving out the people. But yeah, so the trip is not long to get to Israel or the promised land from Egypt. But people have a way of making God's plans take longer than they need to. So,
True.
yeah.
So the trip wasn't long, but the journey.
What? Wow. Wow. That's good, Christy. Yeah.
Yeah.
It turns out the real prize was the friends we made along the way.
That's right.
When talking about a cliche, it's good that it has this kind of cadence. So,
Right.
yeah. Yeah. All right. Any other thoughts on this this passage, these passages?
When Moses calls himself humble, it reminds me of John talking about himself as the disciple that Jesus loved.
Right. Yeah. There's that, but then also John is like, and the disciple Jesus loved is way faster than Peter.
Right.
Like he got there first. He's yeah. I love that. That's one of my that makes me laugh every time. Like that's just a dig at Peter. There's no reason that's in there.
Totally.
I think other than like, yeah, because they're like brothers. Like so.
Yeah. Got there first.
Yeah. I need everybody to know for all time that I'm faster than you. So yeah. All right. Yeah, well, let's call it there. And next week we'll jump in at 15. I think we'll do 15 through 18 is what I have planned. And then the following week I will be out of town. So so we'll meet on the 11th, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
The 11th, and then we won't on the 18th. So all right. So y'all have a good night and a good week, and I'll see you on Sunday.
Sounds good. Bye, guys.